It's lovely to see so many people here this evening. I'll introduce myself first to those of you who don't know me. I'm Rachel Scott. I'm a lecturer at Royal Holloway and a researcher with Language Acts and Worldmaking, which was a project funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council that gave rise to this collaboration. And joining me as co-chair is Rania Mneimneh. And she's one of the curators of the exhibition that our guest speakers are part of. More about that in a minute. Rania has a background in design, art history, and social science, and is generally a very talented woman. And I'm only going to say a few words in introduction now, because I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing from our guest speakers and hearing them talk about their creative practice, as well as the theme for this evening, which is, of course, threading stories of friendship in textile arts. And tonight's discussion is part of a series of talks and events for the exhibition that I mentioned, which is titled Kalila Wa Dimna, Ancient Tales for Troubled Times. And Rania is co-curator along with another woman called Zogheib. And the exhibition is being held at the P21 Gallery in London until the 11th of June. And it's funded principally by Arts Council England and Language Acts and Worldmaking. If you're in or planning to visit London before the 11th of June, please do stop by to the gallery and see the amazing work, which includes pieces by our speakers. And a little bit of background about the exhibition. All of the artworks in Ancient Tales for Troubled Times are inspired by a very old and long-traveled collection of fables called Kalila Wa Dimna, and specifically one of the chapters in the book called The Tale of the Four Friends, or the chapter of the Ringed Dove. To give an overview of the chapter and the themes for those of you that haven't yet visited the exhibition, it's about the possibility of friendship between individuals who are on the surface at least very different. So they're represented by four animals: a crow, a mouse, a tortoise, and a deer. And the chapter also includes a group of ring doves. And these characters create a community by sharing their histories, and they work together to overcome adversities represented by a human hunter in the tale. And the artists and the arts organisations involved in the exhibition have reinterpreted the tale to explore pressing issues such as identity, community migration, and lost heritage. And the resulting works are very thought-provoking and incredibly stunning visually. So I do urge you to go and see it. If you go to the exhibition's website, and we can pop that in the chat, you'll find lots more information about the artworks and the artists and the book and the tale that the exhibition's inspired by. You'll even be able to watch an animated version of the chapter and download it to read for yourself. So that's enough from me. I'm very excited to introduce our guest speakers tonight, who are artists Alice Kettle and Sonia Tuttiett. Alice is a textile and fibre artist, a writer, and a lecturer based in the UK. Her vast textile panels narrate contemporary events through rich and intricate stitchwork, and her works often use embroidery to engage in participatory collaborative projects, such as her show Thread Bearing Witness at the Whitworth in Manchester between 2018 and 2019, where stitch was used to examine refugee issues and migration. And through this project, she came to know Anna, a refugee from Syria, and they've continued to work together on various textile projects, including the artwork that you can see in this exhibition. Alice is Professor of Textile Arts at Manchester School of Arts, Manchester Metropolitan University. Our second speaker is Sonia Tuttiett, and Sonia trained as a professional musician, but always enjoyed art and design. She lives and works in Newham, East London, and she joined East London Textile Arts in 2010. I'll say a little bit about them now as well. She became a tutor with them and the group's lead textile artist. And she was in 2016 the runner-up for the Beraldine Award for Excellence in Embroidery Teaching, and also elected in that year to the Art Workers Guild. She was commissioned in 2017 and 18 to lead a week-long textile workshop for the Who Are We exhibition at Tate Exchange, and has worked on projects with the Watts Gallery and organised various workshops in museums and community spaces, including at the V&A. She's recently been asked to join the judging panel for the Beraldine Award. And I mentioned East London Textile Arts, with whom Sonia works, and this is a collective running participatory textile projects in Newham in East London. It works with diverse groups on a long-term developmental basis, building textile skills within communities that include a learning disabled textile group. And the organisation makes collaborative textiles involving all who come to its classes, which are free. And they're often centred around themes of contemporary concern, including environmental and health projects. And much of the work for the Kalila Wa Dimna exhibition has been made by women who've been refining their skills with ELTA over many years. The group collaborates with visiting artists while providing training and volunteering opportunities for their participants. And ELTA have held exhibitions in St Martin's in the Fields, the Hellenic Centre, the Art Workers Guild, and shown work at the Watts Gallery, among other venues. More information about their projects can be found at their website and on their Instagram account, and we can put links to the artist pages in the chat for you to follow up with. So Alice, Sonia, welcome. It's fantastic to have you with us this evening, and we're very much looking forward to discussing your creative practice as well as the themes of textile work, community and human connection. So we asked each of you, in order to introduce yourself and your work to our audience, we asked you to prepare a brief slideshow to present your artworks and to talk to, and in order for us to be able to see how they intersect. So shall we start with you, and we can give Sonia a bit more time if needed to work on the technical side of things.
Hello, can you
Hi.
hear me? Yes. Well, thank you very much, Rachel and Rania. I just wanted to say to all three, including Ghazaleh, what a fantastic project and exhibition it is. And I feel very honoured to be a small part of it. And the artists are an extraordinary range of disciplines, and the discourse that has been going on between us, I have been really fascinated, and it has its own story. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Sonia talk as well. So, and thank you all for coming. So I'm just going to share my screen. That's okay. Can you see that? Can you see? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Great. Okay. So I'm very quickly going to just, in a way, illustrate what Rachel has just described. A little bit about myself. I tell stories with stitch, very large scale pieces of work, and it's both in the depiction, the kind of drawing of it, but also in the sort of substance itself, because I think textiles and stitch tells its own story. So many of them sort of hold in the sort of stitch process a metaphor or a sort of code of the story itself. And I think that's about kind of reconstructing the world. It's about making things good. It's about making connections or retelling stories in a different version. So I'm not going to tell you exactly the detail of all of these, but just to show you how I work in my own practice. I think there's something very rhythmic about stitching that has its own sort of generative force. And it's almost like a collection of words that it builds up to a kind to tell its own kind of version of a story. And I often think about, the Paul Klee talking about how he's following a line. You don't always know where the story is going to take you. You follow it and you let it lead you. So here are just some examples. Some of them are depictions of contemporary events, but they mix with mythology and personal experience. So they're all enmeshed together in this in these monumental panels. And very often I'm working with other colleagues, so there might be other materials that are part of that process. And here we are. Often they're they're kind of portraits and reflections. And I always think that stitching is about slowing down, that whenever you're stitching, it gives you time to think about what you're doing and think about the ideas in your head. So you kind of reflect on the narrative within yourself, maybe more profoundly. So the Thread-Bearing Witness project that Rachel was talking about was a really big project where I responded to the kind of increase in people displacement, really, which proliferated in 2014-15. And of course, it's one of the most challenging issues of our time. Not to say it hasn't always been a challenging issue. And my daughter, I have 3 daughters, and one daughter gave up a very good job and went, here we are, this is her project called the Dunkirk Legal Support Team. She went out to work very closely with refugees in Dunkirk. And hearing their stories, the first-hand experience, I think all of us felt we have to engage with this as a contemporary narrative. It affects us all. And I think the Kalila Wa Dimna story is a kind of really good example of that. How do we take responsibility for a wider view, a narrative that we are all implicated in? So this was the final project, but it continues, which created these 3 universal sites, sea, ground, and sky, which were populated by all of us. It was like making a shared world through stitch, and they were placed in the center of the gallery so they could be walked behind as well as in front of. In effect, a metaphor for there are no boundaries. It's a world that we're all kind of participating in. They're all stitched. And because I was meeting many thousands of refugees, in a way, I had to regard myself with these panels as the fabricator, the narrator, so to speak. And around it, there were many other related projects. So they are populated by drawings, which I reproduced with a digital sewing machine as closely to the original drawing as I could, and dispersed them quite randomly across the surface. I hosted lots of workshops, drawing workshops, stitching workshops, went into schools, worked very closely with some individuals, and much of this work continues. And I think the whole premise was I was learning that and I was listening, and I had to unpack any assumptions and preconceptions that I might have and learn about and be led by those who were working with me. Often the language was not English, and they were in great danger. They were very traumatized. So textiles was a way of communicating and mediating those really kind of fragile relationships and how we could come together collectively. So here you can see some of the drawings reproduced. And it was an incredibly challenging project, but I think what it taught me was that textiles is a way that is non-threatening, it's ubiquitous, it kind of carries all of these stories about migration through historical trade routes, and actually it's relatable, it's something that we all share. I also did this little project called Stitch a Tree, which was inviting people just to stitch a tree, thinking we'd just have 2 or 3. We ended up having 10,000. From all over the world, which became this like a sort of collective narrative of a forest, perhaps, which again, it shows that we have a common language in a shared world. And also it was a way of skill sharing, showing how young, children could learn from their other generations. So it was truly cross-generational, cross-cultural, cross-gendered, I would say. And then I took the project to Karachi and worked with women there who were expert embroiderers, so a very different circumstance, because I learned so much from stitch as an essential part of their sort of social and economic life. And we made a similar mosaic panel. And through this project, obviously, I've got very, very close to certain individuals. And this is Anna. She's from Syria, and she just stitches and stitches. So I invited her to be part of this project. She's very private. She didn't want to be she didn't want to come here herself. So in a way, I am representing her voice, but her stitching is completely extraordinary. It's a tour de force. And it's like, stories of the world that are spilling out. But of course, it represents her kind of connections with Syria, even though she's in UK, because her family are still there. And it mediates the two places where she feels where she lives and is deeply connected to. So these are the two pieces that she made them. We did much talking and I did some drawing, but essentially she made them. There we are. And what I find really interesting is how she uses this simple line, coming back to Paul Klee, the line, she just catches a tiny thread into the fabric, and it's this continuous line which has this rhythm and vibrancy, and it kind of dynamically animates all of the images around it. And then I thought I'd just finish with one of mine, which is their tributes. They're always tributes, and they're kind of tributes to those that I really care about. And that's kind of it. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Alice. That was very moving. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions about that as well. Sonia, are we ready?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, we can, yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry, I've had terrible problems with technology this evening. The camera decided to give up on us, so excuse this. Right. Would you want me to start?
Yeah, shall we see if we can get the screen shared?
I'll have a go. Okay. Well, it's wonderful to join you this evening. Thank you so much to everybody, especially to Rachel, Rania and Ghazaleh for their incredible hard work on the project. It's been a real privilege to be part of it, and it's such an exciting exhibition. So I'll tell you a little bit about my experience with ELTA. ELTA's been running for about 12 years, initially started by my colleague Celia Ward, who can't join us this evening, but sends her apologies. She wanted to set up a community art group in East London and decided that textile art is an incredibly good medium for small groups with mixed abilities because it's portable, it's cheap, it isn't messy. Anyone can do embroidery. It's an easy thing to do. So our groups include a mixture of highly experienced embroiderers, beginners, people with learning disabilities, and people with all kinds of health issues. And we have a wide age range, although it's mostly retired people. Is this, sorry, I think I need to, I can't do my next. Yes, how do I do that? Sorry, having technical issues again. Change the slide. Is it going to do it? Oh, there we go. No. Sorry, everybody. We have people from very diverse backgrounds in terms of cultures and faiths and nationalities. So the story of Kalila spoke to us, the unexpected friendships that spring up between different animals, the support and concern that they develop between themselves, and the skills that they employ together. It's very much our experience. So we've worked on many projects together, usually one or two themes every year. And we've explored themes that relate to our local community, ranging from health topics like diabetes and dental health to highlighting concerns about our local environment. And we've explored also other cultures. This is a picture of the octagon gown that we produced for the Watts Gallery Orientalism project. I generally design pieces that are embroidered by the group, and these are then appliqued onto either hangings or costumes. And we've increasingly found that we prefer to create costume for exhibitions because they have great impact, and they can also provide an element of performance and drama, and people from the project can model them, and we can photograph people in it and have lots of fun together. And it's become a bit of a hallmark of our groups. We do love to have fun, and every project has opportunities to use our costumes for display and photo shoots. And the adults with learning disabilities are particularly brilliant. This is Laura, who comes to our Monday group, and she has Downs. That's Cara Marion just behind her. We love to do things that are slightly quirky and find that we can get messages about public health or the environment across more effectively through eye-catching design. And Celia's booklets and the fabrics she's created from the embroideries have become increasingly sophisticated over the years. And we use the fabrics for some of our costumes, as you'll see in the exhibition. The crow is wearing a kind of shalwar kameez type thing that is made from one of our fabrics, and the turtle's also wearing a gown that's made from a kind of satin design from photographs of the turtle shells. We also create 3D puppets and fabric sculptures, and we've worked with lots of textile artists, photographers, performers and filmmakers, which keeps our projects fresh and interesting. One thing that's made ELTA so successful is the longevity of the project, and we've built up a wonderful community of friends who love to work together on challenging and interesting projects together. And this is Samina and Bula at our main base, which is Little Ilford Baptist Church. We feel we could not have achieved this had we only taught random short-term classes or sessions, but we do exist entirely on the funding we can generate, generally awards for all, and the classes are free to all participants, so we're kind of on a knife edge at all times. In fact, we have no funding as such for next term, so we've just applied for another grant, so it's always sort of from project to project, as ELTA is. We faced a big challenge over the pandemic period, but strongly felt that we should try to continue the project somehow, because so many of our embroiderers are living on their own, and the sessions are very important for their mental health and physical well-being too. So I decided to organise an embroidery delivery service on my bike, and we also set up Zoom sessions and a WhatsApp group. And also we did some outdoor sessions. Thankfully, it was quite funny for a lot of that period. But we did have quite a few days which were difficult due to rain. So the work on display at the gallery, the PT1 gallery, is a result of all of our work over lockdown. And I think that the story of the four friends working together to overcome adversity became something that we lived through and lived out in a practical way together. We've been very privileged to work with Rachel, Rania and their colleagues on the Kalila project. It's been very exciting to see how other artists involved have interpreted this amazing story. And this partnership has been the most recent of many other collaborations over the years, but these have all enriched and inspired our work. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's fascinating to hear you talk and see the connections between what you both do and how your work has been so rooted in communities, different communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm personally very happy that actually we also saw the presentations, because I got to also see other aspects of your work, and the curator in me was like, wow, we need to talk about this. But really beautiful work, different yet very much intersecting, very much, you know, like there's a lot of common things to discuss. And I felt like, okay, maybe we should move directly to the audience, but I do have some questions. So I think Sonia started by answering the question, but so I will start with you, Alice. What drew you to participate in Kalila Wa Dimna exhibition? What did you find interesting, particularly in the chapter of the Tale of the Four Friends?
Thank you, Rania. Well, as I'd been working on the Thread-Bearing Witness project, I had become used to hearing wonderful stories and working with wonderful groups of incredible embroiderers, and it just seemed to be a way that we could communicate and come together. So obviously when you invited me to be part of the Kalila Wa Dimna project, it just seemed a perfect way to look at a more closely linked relationship, because of course I've become very close to some of the people I've been working with. They are like family to me. And so this idea of friendship, you know, that Stitch is about connecting, reinforcing, it's about meeting, you know, and binding things, as well as telling stories that are kind of universal truths, universal, they're fables, they transcend cultures, and which I found really interesting, the way that it kind of transgresses any sort of particular culture. and that it's anthropomorphic. You know, it's the animals who are kind of who are the characters. And I just thought this is a way that you unpack hierarchies, that we kind of come together and we realize these kind of really important truths about how we want our society to be, but how, and that's kind of enduring. That goes, and I love mythology. I think storytelling is a way that we, if we think about fairy stories, very often they are uncomfortable truths and dilemmas that we have to confront. But we resolve them through this idea of storytelling. We find the kind of core truth. And I've picked out one little bit, if you'll let me read it, because I just thought this is what encapsulates it. So it's the crow who's listened to the tortoise talking to the mouse. And he said, "You've made me very happy and done me a favor. You ought to be very pleased with yourself, since I am so happy. For the foremost people in this world who are happiest and enjoy the best reputation are those who do not desert their friends and companions. They are easy to get along with and are constantly thinking up ways to make them happy themselves. They are behind them in case of need or in business. Just as when an elephant gets stuck in the mud, it does not get out except with the help of another elephant." And I thought, there we are. It's fantastic. And so I feel this relationship I have with Anna, I care about her so much. It's a very sensitive relationship, but it's a way that we can meet and discuss our different worlds, our lives together. She's much younger than me. But we come together through, and the story allowed us to discuss our friendship and what we mean to each other. And we did that both in stitching, but also in our discussion. So I hope, does that answer your question?
Yes. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Especially, like as you mentioned, the characters and how they can be different, but yet through storytelling, it's kind of mirror also what happened with you and Anna, and the generation difference was not an obstacle, like with all the common interests that you can share, So great. Sonia, would you like to answer this? Because I think you already did a bit, but I don't know if you'd like to add. So what drew you to participate in the exhibition in terms of organization, and you and Celia? And what did you find interesting about the chapter?
Well, I think, as I touched on, the experience of the four very different characters who in the natural would be unlikely to become allies. It's very much experience of people in East London. They're full of very diverse groups that don't often come together. There is a bit of suspicion. People tend to stay in their own community groups because they feel safer there, for very good reasons, actually, often. But part of ELTA's philosophy is to bring everybody together, no matter your ability or your race or your colour or your gender or anything, really. And so it kind of really spoke to us as a group, and Rachel came to explain the story right at the beginning of the project, and that was great because a lot of the ladies had heard the story, or they came from backgrounds where these kinds of stories are quite familiar, and they really related to them very well. And then also Rachel and I went into a local primary school, Sir John Heron School, which again is very diverse, children from all kinds of backgrounds, some of whom have parents who don't have English as a first language, and we had some very interesting discussions with the children around how they kind of help their parents to negotiate the world through language. and often told each other stories because their parents couldn't read books to them. That came out, which is very interesting. I hadn't realised that, although I've been a governor and a teacher in that area for a long time. That was the first time I'd heard children say that to me. So I think the discussion around the story brought out so many other stories and so many other experiences that people had, and people felt they could express themselves through the embroidery. We have a very a very broad policy. We don't tell people which colours to use or how to embroider something. I produce a design, and then it's up to them to make it as colourful or as tonal as they want to, really. And somehow it all comes together really beautifully, whether people are beginners or very experienced. It doesn't matter. The community art, everything goes together really well. So I think that's kind of a reflection of Kalila. It's what we do anyway, but it made us kind of think quite carefully and reflect on our practice, actually, and what we've learned over the years as people that lead the project, but also people that are all taking part in it.
Yeah, I would love to know about those reflections, but I will stay with you, Sonia, and ask you about the creative process, because you mentioned a bit in the presentation. So there was the pandemic, the project started. You want to talk a bit how the creative process started in the context of the pandemic and in general?
Yeah, well, I think we started off with creating pictures of the story of the four friends together. So I designed the various characters together in little sort of cartouches and things like that. But then because of our experience of creating costume, we felt quite early on that we should try and create something that represented the animals that would be quite interesting for an exhibition. We found before that costume has quite an impact, and it can be on quite a large scale, and it can incorporate an awful lot more of people's work than just little bits of embroidery on a quilt. We have got one of those on display actually in the gallery, which our friend Sue Haig made into a beautiful quilt. And there's also a quilt that Cindy Jackson produced at the Mondrian hanging. But the costumes can incorporate an enormous amount of embroidery. So what I was doing was giving people shapes or squares or bits of embroidery that people could then, I was on my bike delivering it, plus supplies, threads and hoops and anything else people needed. And then I'd go and collect it. And then I made it up into the costumes that we have, apart from the deer costume, which was one that Rachel Matthews produced. And that was through rag rugging. And it was very interesting because she actually has been going around the streets of East London collecting all the old bits of clothing that are discarded around the place and recycling it, washing it, and then tearing it all up and then making it into rag rug pieces. And so the deer cloak in the exhibition is actually one of those pieces. It's incredibly heavy, and it's then been embroidered back into by members of the group. We had a lot of fun collaborating on that one. Rachel brought it to the group. So that's kind of how we designed it and produced the pieces that you can see in the gallery today.
Great. And there is a blog about it on the website if anyone wants to know more about the process, because Sonia kindly shared her thoughts and we put them on the website. So Alice, actually, I'm going to combine two questions. So about the creative process, how it started with you and Anna. And within that, I want to ask you about collaborative work and the enabling dimensions of collaborative work.
Okay. Thank you, Rania. Well, specifically with Anna, I've built up a relationship with her over quite some period of time. And so we know each other very well. And it feels like we're helping each other. And this project, I asked her to read the story and she read it in Arabic and I read it in English. So we discussed how maybe we had the same meanings, where we got the same meaning from the story, which is interesting. And then she said, what do you want me to do? So it's interesting what Sonia's saying, because my whole premise is, no, you tell me, you do what you feel is illustrative of the story. And we often have this conversation. She waits for me to tell her what I want, and I wait for her to tell me what she wants. So this took a little time. But what was really interesting was that I left, so I just waited. I waited because I felt like she has a really incredible aesthetic, and she started to interpret the story as a geometric story. So there's one piece that, so we did two pieces, and the first one is entirely her, where she drew upon her Syrian heritage and interpreted the four friends in this diamond shape, which I thought was extraordinarily powerful, because what it said is there is a kind of synergy and symbiosis, and a kind of, obviously it draws upon arabesque geometry. So I felt like her cultural heritage was there, represented through the medium of the story. And so I was very glad that I had stepped back from that. And then we drew the second one, we drew much more directly. We ended up drawing it together and discussing it a lot. So that idea of collaboration, I find, it's about power. It's about trying to give each other equal voice, and that's not always easy to do. And it's very individual according to who you're collaborating with. So if you're collaborating with a group, it can be very different from one individual. And what I've discovered through doing the Thread-Bearing Witness project is I have to step back, or I want to step back, but it takes a lot of time to build up trust. So again, it's really interesting what Sonia's saying about this kind of longevity and the enduring nature of kind of carrying on with projects and workshops and getting to know people, because that's when you start to articulate really, wonderful things about how you can work together, about reciprocity. But I think textiles is a really good way of doing that, because if you're sitting together, you can discuss and talk about things, and you can actually bring your work together, because again, as Sonia was saying, it's very portable. So that's again one of the advantages for Anna, that she has small children, so she could do it at home. And during the pandemic, it's something that you can do, but you can also share through the medium of the screen. And similarly, we did lots of online workshops, with groups. I did this little workshop. I've got a book here that we did some making projects, which we made into a little booklet during the pandemic with lots of different groups of different languages, just because we felt we needed to come together as a community, and it was a way that stitching can facilitate that without needing to be able to understand each other through oral means. And so I think the story is really interesting, because you gave it to us in these different text forms, and it's come out in these multiple different ways. So it's been interpreted, it's been translated, it evolves and changes, but its core meaning remains the same. So I find that really powerful. So hopefully that answers a little bit of what you're saying.
Yes, definitely. And we can honestly, there's a lot of questions. Alice, you touched upon many themes, many topics in your answers. So I wanted to follow up and ask you, so we talked about stitching and textile as a language. And this is also a conversation we had throughout the process of the artistic process on this project. So, and you did a bit share about the different backgrounds where you work in textile with, you also teach. So can you share a bit about textile as a language by itself, and how it changes with each settings, and how, how the work is different in each setting, and the process and the outcome?
Yes, that's lots of big questions. Well, in a way, why I showed you the little running stitch close up was because for me that was so evocative of how the individual handprint is within each stitch. And although we are taught to do it differently, we learn to do it differently, and we interpret it differently, but it carries our cultural heritage. So for example, when I worked, so that way of stitching the running stitch with Anna was very specific to her. And I talked a lot about how she learned and how kind of Syrian, she was taught stitching in school as a child, and they learned very specific stitches, but then she kind of interpreted those into her own way. Whereas Susan, who's another stitcher I work with, who's from Uganda, she uses the same running stitch, but in a completely different way. So it has an equal balance between what's under the fabric and what's on top of the fabric. And just those very simple ways of working, they kind of embody something about where you come from, place of origin, and also the kind of patterns which are recorded in some of the stitching, that all these different people I was working with, you know, they were extraordinarily beautiful. And what you realize is it kind of harks back to, you know, tradition that is passed down through generations. And it has, and one of the things that it's done is migrate through trade routes, you know, the South Asian and the roots across Europe, you know, a lot, and then it goes back again. So all of those histories and geographies and the politics of that is kind of embodied in a lot of these textile works. I can't remember what else you asked me, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's just because you also work on textile in different settings and you also teach. So I don't know if you want to share a bit about that quickly.
Well, yes, so I work in an art school, and so I'm teaching undergraduate degree students, but also PhD students. But a lot of what increasingly students are really interested in the way we can kind of engage with others, that we aren't doing it as art for art's sake, and textiles as a way to kind of work in the community, to reclaim some of those haptic skills that maybe are not so common these days. And so it's about this kind of skill sharing that has become really important in terms of how we work. Obviously, where I teach, we have new technologies and old technologies, so we're trying to see how we can reproduce some of those archetypal designs and make them versions that are in the modern frame, you know, that they are relevant to today. And so I'm working with students who maybe become designers. They may be working in clothing, but also they're using textiles as a way to you know, work with communities who might not otherwise have an opportunity to be creative or to have a voice. So it's very broad in its aspect, and I think that textile is very good at that. It's very important that it kind of engages at all levels. It's complicated because we have lots of safeguarding issues. There are lots of ethics involved, and I'm very mindful of all of those, and we have to be very alert to all of those different and also we're very alert to kind of decolonizing our curriculum and thinking about how we are diverse and equal in terms of how we think and work.
Sonia, not to jump in, Rania, you can just see Sonia nodding along there.
Yeah, exactly.
Alice is talking.
Yeah, and actually on that note, I wanted to ask you, Sonia, in the context of ELTA, so there is, you know, the mission of working with high skilled textile work, but there's also, as you mentioned, diversity in the community. So how do you navigate working on textile with the different, let's say, skills in the community, and do people bring different backgrounds to the work, and do you want to share a bit about that experience?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I think a lot of people that come to the group initially are quite unconfident, but it's extraordinary how quickly stitching can build a lot of confidence, because it's actually very easy. You can do it to any level. You can do a couple of running stitches, but once you get started on it, you can develop your vocabulary of stitch. And I think that you can and some people love to stitch with a lot of texture, and people develop their own signature. And it's interesting. I can always tell who's done which piece of work. Although they've all learnt the same stitching, they've all got very individual ways of, almost like a colour signature. Some people always gravitate towards the same colours. It's quite interesting, and I think that people just find it very mindful. They find it very interesting. Some of the most interesting things I've seen from our groups are the ones from the adults with learning disabilities. Actually, they can do work which is very, very intense, like going over and over and over a stitch. And it creates the most amazing texture and colour. I mean, it kind of obliterates the initial design sometimes, but it creates something even more beautiful. And one of the tortoises on the jacket, you'll see all the knots on the outside, on the right side of the fabric, because that's the way that Laura, who's got Down syndrome, works. She never puts her knots on the back; she puts them on the front. And I love to see that kind of random variety. It would be so boring if everybody was stitching the same way, and I'm very careful never to say to somebody, do it this way. It's about seeing how they can express themselves, and we don't get many people doing things that are from their own background. I've actually been doing things about cantha and introducing different techniques, needle lace, cantha, all kinds of things, just to keep the interest going. But people don't, they've often started sewing a very long time ago, and they've forgotten. And so for them, coming back to stitching means they gain a new vocabulary, a new confidence, I think.
Yeah, so actually the element of human connection, I mean, it's always there. I'm not sure I wanted to ask about this, but I think we kind of discussed this on multiple instances. So I want to ask you, like, how do you see your work evolving, and will you take from the process of working on Kalila Wa Dimna and future projects? I'll start with you, Sonia, since we...
Yeah, well, it was interesting because it's the first time that our group has actually worked on a story. And that was so interesting. It really engaged people right from the beginning. People related to the themes. The children found it wonderful to have a story told to them and to explore themes together. It was quite interesting because we did a workshop in East London with the school children, and we just basically Rachel told the stories and explored the themes, and then the children just had fun trying to make costumes, trying to create the characters in groups and collaborate. It was all about collaborating and designing and working together. And at the end of the session, the head teacher said that she felt it was a session that had taken a lot of risks. The children learned about risk taking, which is a very interesting phrase, I thought. But I realised actually perhaps with some of our grown-ups too, that they are taking risks as well, because they're so frightened of getting things wrong. The main thing people say to me is, oh, have I done it right? And I always say, well, of course you have, it's fine. There's no wrong way of doing it. So it's funny how people kind of bind themselves into worrying that they're not doing something that is of the same standard as somebody else in the group. So I think that because we've been going for many years, we have many people that stay with us, as well as newcomers all the time. People can reassure each other and can encourage each other. There's a great amount of that going on. But following on from your question, I think the way we're going to be evolving the project, and we always like to keep it fresh and new, because we have a lot of members who've been there a long time, that's very important to have something new. So I introduce new stitching, new techniques, new world stitching techniques. We go to exhibitions, we go to shows, but we're going to do another story theme inspired by our work on Kalila. We're going to have a look at Romeo and Juliet and all the themes around bereavement and love and hate and gang stuff, which is very relevant to this area. We're going to be working with a street artist and a performer. We're going to be evolving more of the photographic and film elements, because those have been really great to do in relation to Kalila. So yes, I think we've learned a lot from this project actually, and it's given us confidence to try new things, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to say that we're gonna start the questions very soon, but I'm gonna also leave it to Alice if you want to talk a bit about your future projects in the context of Kalila and outside.
Thank you, Rania. Yes, I think it was really helpful to have a very contained theme to work with, and we found it was a really good vehicle to do something quite ambitious in terms of a piece of work that Anna sustained over quite some months, and she felt very proud of it. You know, so I think this idea that we could delve into the nature of our friendship through the story was really important. So I'm fascinated to hear about you talking about sort of love and all these other kind of universal human themes, because I think there's something really powerful in the way that I'm thinking about how I could maybe ask some of the other refugees that I work with to think about these big themes that are about the human psyche. I have projects where we're working to make cushions. We're making sort of saleable things, because there's some economies of, you know, finding ways to support the groups and things. So we're doing things where we can sell things to make to reinvest in the activities of the group. And I'm working very closely with a couple of other fantastic refugees, Susan and Monica, who are exchanging work between each other, because they've got to know each other through the project, and they live the other ends of the country in the UK, but they are they've found this kind of collaborative venture between each other. So they're making, one of them is making a piece, and then they're exchanging and working on it together, and they will have an online exhibition in July. And they're also developing their own work, so that we found a way that they can support each other, which I had never imagined could happen. So actually the story encapsulates that, and I'm thinking about how maybe they need to tell their own story through this, in reference to this chapter of the Ring Dove. The other thing is this work, the workshops that we do with diverse groups. You know, I think we want to continue that. So there's the skill sharing. So the whole idea is that I'm initiating something which then has its own momentum in it, and we carry those activities on they carry them on between each other, and then we see how these things evolve. But I think the whole notion of friendship is so defining, and it made me think about all of these activities that we're doing. Our friendship and reciprocity and mutual support is at the kind of core of all of them. And seeing the little booklet that you did at ELTA, it just made me think that, and the website that you've done with the Kalila Wa Dimna project, there's something really powerful about collectively drawing it all together and giving it a narrative, which I think has its own story, which is important to tell.
I think these are some really interesting, thought-provoking points that you both raise, and I certainly have more questions, but I think it's time to open up to our audience and see if there are any questions anybody would like to ask. There was, I noted, at least one on the chat that I can read out. So Danielle has said, I would be really interested to hear more on your thoughts on how the process of making together can facilitate conversations that wouldn't be had without the shared objective or activity. I will leave that open. Sonia, Alice, if you want to respond to that, that's an interesting point.
Shall I respond first?
Yeah.
I think that our experience at ELTA is that everybody comes from the local area, but they're people that wouldn't have got together in any other project really, or any other way. So we found there's an awful lot of I don't know, just embroidering together. You don't have to look at somebody. You can sit and chat quietly. It can be quite quiet. And I think a lot of people come to groups because it's quite meditative. It's quite calming, but it's, at the same time, it is social. And I think there are lots of quite marginalised and cut off people, isolated people, especially in London, especially as you get older. And so I do think these groups are very powerful and empowering. And I just think, you know, there are lovely friendships that have been built up, and I'm just thinking of people who have friendships across faiths that go shopping together, or go to exhibitions as a result of having met at the groups. And certainly over lockdown, the WhatsApp group was incredibly helpful to everybody, I think. It was, we shared what we were doing at home, so it kind of normalised the situation. But I do think you do share things with people. It's interesting, doing the workshop at the P21 Gallery on the 14th, people came together that never met each other before, and yet there were conversations, they were starting to get to know each other. You can share things, you know, common interests, but also you can share personal things. And I think that's just really wonderful. These conversations are very, very comforting and very powerful things. And I just think enjoying seeing other people's work too, it inspires you to try and do other things yourself.
I noted one thing that Alice said, and I think you might have touched on it as well, Sonia, was this aspect of hierarchy, that when people come together through an activity like stitching, that there isn't a hierarchy there, that you're collaborating on something and that each stitch is equally valuable, each narrative, each voice is equally valuable together, woven into those larger pieces, which I think is a really powerful point that maybe touches on the question that Danielle asked.
Yeah.
Alice, I don't know if you had anything to add to respond to Danielle's question, or add to what Sonia's already responded.
Well, it's made me reflect, actually. And I thought I'd just tell you about something that happened when I was in one of the refugee camps. And when I got there, I just thought, I can't, I'll just set up shop and start stitching, which is what I did over a few days, because I can't make assumptions about how the circumstances that people are in. And various things sort of gradually happened over a period of time. And one of the things that happened was this very noble, very tall African gentleman started to come, and I asked him to do some drawing, and he did some drawing. You know, he would come maybe 5 minutes, then he'd go away, come another day, 5 minutes, and gradually this drawing evolved. And that this was just one of the things that was going on. And they were beautiful drawings. So then I asked some of the other other clients, I think they called them, their residents, if they wanted to make this into a banner. And so collectively we started to interpret the drawing into a banner, and gradually it involved more and more people. There was no kind of, you know, we couldn't speak the same languages, but everyone kind of understood what we were doing. And eventually we made this beautiful banner which went on the wall in one of the kitchen rooms. And I heard afterwards that some of the children and the other refugees were quite frightened of this man because he was so tall and statuesque. And actually through doing that, it kind of changed the hierarchies, and it changed the way people could relate to each other simply because we had done that shared activity. So it made me reflect on your question, that maybe a lot more goes on than you appreciate at many different levels. So perhaps that answers it a little bit.
And as you pointed out, it's about going beyond assumptions, isn't it, of people, of who they are, what their background is, and accepting at face value almost how you come to the stitching, how you come to the piece of work.
Yeah.
There was another question. So Julian, who I think has now left, said it. He wanted to ask about the fact that there is an element or an atmosphere of fear that's created in the story. So the animals, when we first meet them, they're in danger. They meet one of them, they form a friendship, then they move again because they face another set of challenges, like another danger, and they meet again, and then they move again. So there's this constant sense of movement and a journey that the animals are on physically and emotionally. And that runs through the story. And Julian's question was about how you had responded to that atmosphere, if you picked up on it, how it had caused you to think and consider the themes or the tale itself, to both of you.
Yeah. You want to say something? I think that if you look at the costumes that we created, we definitely thought quite carefully about these elements, and you'll see that there are a couple of cloth rifles that Rachel created. There's the hunter's cloak, which is all about eyes and seeing everywhere, and we were just very much aware that this was a story that we could really bring out that element in. And the mouse costume, if you look at it, I designed it so that the mice are gnawing through a shawl, which is to represent the net, but they're attacking the woman wearing it. And it was deliberately done so that it would kind of make people feel a little bit queasy, because I think that you know, it has that element. That story is about danger, it's about risk. And also some of our other designs were with the four friends together and illustrating the story quite directly. One beautiful thing I would like to point out, if you have a look at the quilt, Kan Singh, who's a Chinese member of our group, it was the lockdown obviously was on, and we illustrated the deer that was tangled in a rope, and she decided to embroider the NHS rainbow symbol on her deer on the chest to symbolize that it was kind of a time of danger, and that was her way of kind of relating the story back to the circumstances that we were finding ourselves. And I found that very poignant. So it was nice to see people interpreting things in that kind of way. And some people used colors to express the danger in the story as well. The deer costume is quite carefully thought out in terms of color, and the way it's been embroidered back into.
Alice, would you like to respond to that? This question of
really,
fear, or the idea of fear?
Yeah, really good question. I was very mindful of that because with my previous projects and going into the camps, I had to be very conscious of trauma and re-trauma. And so the kind of threat that is in the story is really present in many people's lives. And so I was a bit careful about who I did the project with. And obviously I've had to be very respectful of the privacy and how the focus is on the story with Anna. So and obviously it's a story, but those stories are representative of human experience. So that idea of trauma, danger, entrapment, they're all things that the people I've worked with probably have experienced. So that's a tricky one. That's a really tricky one because you're not trying to resolve it. You can't change that. You can't make it better. But maybe in kind of doing something creative, well, you hope you can do it better, which is what the story is about, but in recognizing that life has these really destructive pathways and that we have to acknowledge them and meet them and show that we care. I think that is kind of implicit in the story, and I think textiles is a really good way of encountering some of that without verbalizing it, perhaps. So I don't know. I think that's a really big question that I don't think I've answered terribly well, but I'm very aware of that issue.
Sonia?
Can I just say that Celia's film that's on our website was quite good, because I think it related some of the embroideries that people were doing to some of the voices of our participants who had experienced trauma and migration and all the uprooting of that experience. I think there was a particular man from Africa that had a horrendous experience, and that was related back to the story, which I thought was very effective. So I think film and textile can tell stories very well.
Yeah, this is the migration tales.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So there is a wonderful video which is up on the project website, which I would urge you to check out. And it really, as Sonia said, it really will resonate with a lot of what she and Alice have mentioned in tonight's talk. Do we have any?
We have.
Sorry, go on,
Rania. Yeah, we have Eileen asking, but I think I'm not sure if she want to specify. She's still here. If you have any advice on how to start a community group. I don't know if Eileen, if you want to share what types of community group, but I don't know who would like to answer. Sonia, do you want to answer based on the experience with ELTA? Any advice on how to start a community group?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it can be set up in lots of different ways, really. We've found over the years that you do need somebody, do need to kind of employ people to do designers do some of the work if you want a group that's going to have longevity. You can set something up, but it's very hard to maintain it because there's a lot of work. It's hard work doing community work, and there's a lot behind the scenes that needs to be done. And I think if you want it to have, well, we pride ourselves on the fact that we do design very carefully, and we design respectfully, and we do all the things that Alice has mentioned, really. You have to be very sensitive to where people are coming from and how they are in a group. And I think it's part of the skill of leading a group or teaching that you have a kind of an eye on everybody and making sure that people get on well together. So starting a group, you can do it just by sitting in a library and doing something. You always find people will come along and say, "What are you doing? Can I have a go?" It can be done very cheaply. And it can develop. I think you kind of have to start with the premises somewhere to sow and the idea and just see where it takes you. But I think along the line, it does need funding. It does need some way of maintaining it and keeping it going. And also, I think groups need a kind of a purpose. And we found at ELTA that we are we're very conscious we have to keep the thing fresh and new. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. It's not interesting for us to teach or design for, but also it's not interesting for the participants. So part of our strategy is to always be looking ahead to the next theme, the next idea, to get inspired and to inspire the people that are on this kind of journey with us. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I hope it does. And as you mentioned, yeah, she's saying it's really helpful. Yeah, I thought honestly, I don't know if we have more questions, but I thought to quickly talk about art and access in the context of both of your work. You know, in this exhibition, we tried to move from the academic field, bring the work to the gallery, work with organizations, touring with students, with members from the organizations. But there is always this issue of access. So I don't know if you want to share, like, to end our discussion about art practice and access in the context of textile. Who would like to discuss this a bit? Alice or yeah, sure.
I think that, again, that's a really important question, because galleries are sometimes difficult places for to access if you don't feel confident to go in them. So I think all of the related projects, you know, the activities that surround maybe an exhibition are part of its reach and so important. So that's where I think you've done so well, because it's so complicated what you've done in terms of the quantity of activities and the artists and all of the different aspects to it. And it has a website which in another way makes it more accessible. So I think all of those contributions are really critical, because and I found with my exhibition, in a way, the exhibition is just one small thing. It has to extend its activities way beyond, and they have to be sustained. It can't just be about the one thing, because life, you have to build trust and you have to extend that trust into the future, and those relationships. So I think access is a constant issue and has to be constantly addressed. And that can be very different for different people in terms of language, in terms of geography, in terms of, for my exhibition, we ended up hiring some minibuses and paying for lunch. You know, that whole notion of hospitality, that how do you access a gallery space? Do you have lunch in it? Do you sit on the floor? So all of those things you just have to keep thinking about all the time.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that. I do think that textiles can work very well with other media in an exhibition. I think you can see that at the P21 gallery, and perhaps a drama of costume or large scale work such as Alice's work and Anna's work kind of appeal to people because they're quite tactile and they can have a playful nature, and I think they can engage people. Textiles are very familiar things. We all wear textiles, we all sleep under textiles, and I think quilts and costume and you know, sort of curtains, you know, large scale textile pieces really do kind of engage people's interest, we found. I think one of the problems for community groups though is the fact it's so expensive to actually exhibit anywhere and to find exhibition spaces. So we've really struggled to get our works on display sometimes, and I also think that textiles have been a bit like the poor man of the art world, and so I'd love to see textiles given more prominence in exhibition spaces, and you know, I think that exhibitions should be accessible to anyone. And I think the mixture of research, storytelling, art and film and mixed media are very appealing because something will appeal to somebody, and they might discover something they'd never thought of as art, or relate to something that they didn't think they would relate to. And I think that the exhibition you've put on is very much one of those. There's so many interesting mixed things going on that, you know, I've had my eyes opened looking at some of the exhibits myself actually. And I think the wide range of things you have going on there is appealing to all ages and cultures and you know, and people's interests, I think.
Rania.
Yeah, great to hear. Yes, Rachel, do you wanna wrap up?
No,
I think this was amazing, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone would like to ask more questions, but yeah, I'll leave it to you, Rachel, now. And yeah, Sonia, bearing in mind, honestly, the idea of access and galleries is always an ongoing thing. And even beyond galleries, the work that you both are producing with the community, with artists, with high-skilled textile, with, you know, like all the engagement. Honestly, this is more the longevity beyond, you know, a one-time 4-week exhibition. So this is where I think continuity matters. Yeah.
And certainly for me, one of the things that I've enjoyed so much about the project has been going beyond the university classroom, going beyond just me sitting with my ideas in front of the books and thinking. It's really enriched my practice as a researcher, having to see it from different perspectives and seeing how it can resonate so differently with many different people. I have to say one of the most enjoyable things has been doing the workshops with Sonia with the children, because they were just so inventive and creative and fun and just absolutely gorgeous. And we're hoping that the school that we worked with, Sir John Heron, that they'll be hopefully coming to view their own work, which is in the gallery as well. And I found it really really thought-provoking, thinking about art galleries in a very different way, in terms of opening them up to children and people that wouldn't necessarily see themselves as being part of that world. So exactly what Sonia said really resonated with me as well, having that exposure to so many different types of art and perspectives. And this is a book that is all about different perspectives and bringing different perspectives onto a theme or an issue or the world in general. So I found it really enriching myself. We have maybe one more time for one more question. If anybody wants to pop something in the chat or mute themselves and ask it directly, we do have that time.
Speaking of books, Rachel, it was mentioned in the chat by Julian as well. A book entitled "Talking to Strangers: What we should know about the people we don't know." I haven't read it, but I'm just mentioning it in case it can sound interesting. Noted on my side.
Oh yes, the Malcolm Gladwell's book. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can wrap it up, and I want to ask, like, any final thoughts you want to share, Alice and Sonia, not necessarily related to exhibition, in general. If you have any final thought, we would love to hear. I mean, you did very wonderful presentations, but
I would just like to thank you, because I think you've done something quite unique in the scope of the project, and, you know, curating it across different geographical regions and bringing the different disciplines together and the range of artists. I think it kind of sheds light on the story and the human condition in such a fantastic way. And I think that creates a community. You know, we all become those four friends, don't we? We are all of them at once. So I think there is something really special about the project, and I am really delighted to have been part of it. So thank you.
Yeah, I echo those thoughts exactly. It's been wonderful to be part of it, and I think all of our participants have really learned a lot through it. I think about not just about the embroidery this time, but about you know, friendship, cooperation, collaboration. It's been very, very relevant to our times as an embroidery group.
Yes.
well, thank you so much. I also wanted to say that, yeah, exactly, this is what happened for us as a group, you know, and I'm really happy I met you all. So the story also speaks to us now on a personal level. And Rachel and me and you and Zalia also has been working on this for like 3 years. So
Yeah.
with the pandemic and the
it's been a labor of love, hasn't it?
Yeah. But I'm really looking forward to see your work in the context of this talk in the future. And I will always, you know, like, I'm really excited to see all the projects that both of you are going to work on, ELTA, Alice, Sonia, Celia. And yeah, thank you so much for joining. I think we're gonna wrap it up. Yeah. And I will say, for those who are still remaining, thank you for being patient. The exhibition website will keep having content, because the idea is not to limit to only the gallery. If you're in London, go visit the exhibition is till June 11. If you can't, we will have content on the website. We'll keep sharing and archiving, because this is what matters. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And we're staying in touch.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Alice and Sonia. Bye.
Thank you.